We are consciousness before and after. How would you talk without a body? Of course, it's through telepathy.
These individuals have the ability to do ESP, essentially, being able to read people's minds.
The telepathy tapes, many of their spiritual revelations are brought forth. And this is why everyone involved wants more research done because it is a confounding question. What is happening? I feel like there's a link between spirituality, simulation theory, dimensions, and those are things that have come up all the time in this work. Animals have relied on telepathy to communicate. And I think the baseline of it, again, is like a deep connection and love. And now I believe fully that consciousness survives the body, that there is somewhere more real than here. I had a really hard time believing it. I had to see it for myself.
I like to welcome to the show Kai Dickens. How you doing, Kai?
Good. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm a fan of your work, and how you got here is a unique story because I we get bombarded with requests of people coming on the show, and a lot of times they're like, "Oh, you should check this person out." And our audience is so beautiful that they recommend people that they think would be good guests, or good topics, and the telepathy tapes kept coming in. Like, not by like one person bombarding us to try to fake that there's interest, because that's been done before. But actual, like, real recommendations. So when we investigated the telepathy tapes, I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. So first of all, congratulations for getting up there and doing this. This is pretty remarkable stuff.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been the journey of my lifetime, that's for sure.
So tell me exactly what the telepathy tapes are, and how did you delve into these kind of, woo woo, woo woo
Yeah.
concepts? Because your work is very social causes, really grounded. This is a little bit more into the woo, as I like to call it.
Yeah, this is definitely not my standard, story. I have always worked in social issue films, usually trying to like expand access to affordable healthcare or, paid family medical leave policies or helping shed light on PTSD and, survivor's guilt and, just things like that. So I've never ever worked on anything like this before. And and I became interested in it after hearing an interview with a Johns Hopkins, educated Harvard, former Harvard staff neuroscientist named Dr. Hennessy Powell, who had been studying savant syndrome. And in the course of doing so, she said that many of these children that she was studying did not have savant syndrome. Instead, it seemed they could read their parents' minds. And she was hearing that reported from parents all over the world. And so she had done some initial studies on this. Separating the person that the child is saying they're telepathic with and would, put them through a divider. And sure enough, they could tell you what their parent was looking at, whether it was a random number, a random word, a fake word. And so I saw the initial tests and I had a few conversations with her. And I thought, if this is real, if this is true, the consequences for society are massive. I mean, or just
Hmm.
humanity, right? If this is
Hmm.
real. And so I had a really hard time believing it. I had to see it for myself. And so when I, started diving in, I decided I wanted to orchestrate my own test and bring in one of the non-speaking autistic individuals that had cold written, Diane's email, which a lot of parents were doing. And I invited this family and Dr. Powell to where I live, in the valley near Los Angeles, and rented a space, set up my own tests, put cameras all over the room, bought my own cues, my own iPad, and downloaded the random number generator. And I was blown away. And then I wanted to see more kids, so or non-speakers, and so continued for about a year and a half, just meeting families, receiving their stories, capturing tests when I could, in hopes to make a sizzle reel for a film. And when we pitched the film, or for a docu-series, and when we pitched the docu-series, I think people didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't like creepy paranormal, it wasn't family television, it wasn't true crime. And so even though people were fascinated, they were like, we just don't know if this fits our mandate and what category it's in.
Oh yeah.
And I thought, yeah, and I thought, but this is so important. Like this is so important, and it's true, and it's the best kept secret out there. Parents and teachers and everyone knows about this, and people have been documenting it for years and writing books, and like just you don't think anyone will care, you know? And and it was a no. And so I mean, I went through a period of a few weeks of feeling really devastated. Like, I thought this was so important. And I was
Mhm.
like, do I not get it? Like, did I read this wrong? And then thinking I let down the parents and Dr. Powell and the story and not knowing what to do. And then someone's like, I don't understand why you need like a big streamer to get the story out. Can't you just do a podcast? And then it was like, oh, okay. So that was sort of my promise made kept, to the families was like, I'll get your story out. I'll do my due diligence to tell it as best as I can. And thinking I know my parents would listen, I knew they would listen, but I had no idea that the telepathy tapes, which was sort of my vehicle just to like hopefully get funding and notice to eventually make the film, would become this sensation. I didn't imagine that in a million years.
For everybody listening, basically these are autistic children who are non-speakers. Is that specific, or are there ones that are speakers that have these abilities as well?
Well, I think this is a good question and a really important point to make. I really think this is more about a non-speaking ability or apraxia, where your mind and body are disconnected, less to do with
Mhm.
autism. However,
Okay.
since releasing the podcast, I've received numerous emails from both highly functioning autistic individuals,
Mm.
as well as even neurotypical people who are saying that they also have these gifts, or that they had, especially people higher functioning with autism who've said they have these gifts, but kind of got gaslit out of them by a society that says it's impossible. But yes, in the project, it's mostly focused on non-speaking individuals who do have autism and who have apraxia.
Basically, what the premise is, if I'm just going to recount here, is that these individuals have the ability to do ESP, essentially, being able to read people's minds or under like I mean when I saw your sizzle reel, it was kind of like it reminded me of the opening scene of Ghostbusters with Bill
Mm.
Murray sitting there with the cards, and they're like a couple wavy lines, a circle, a square, as because it was, it's at that time in that movie it's being kind
Yeah.
of ridiculed, like this doctor's so crazy that he's trying to do ESP. And then, of course, he goes and busts ghosts. Uh, but
Yeah.
that's what it would look like. So is that what it is essentially?
Yeah, I mean that is what we found, or from the precursory tests, and it's really remarkable. And I think what some of the parents will say is, and the parents and teachers. I mean, this is teachers in the project in the telepathy tapes. There's also teachers, therapists, speech pathologists, principals, ministers, rabbis, siblings, right? Like so many people are witnessing this and seeing this. And I think what most of them will say is, yes, they seem to be able to hear thoughts clearly, but also it seems like sometimes can almost see through their eyes and hear through their ears. And that's what's been really, I think, both confounding for the parents and as well as for me. And that's why we want more research done in this, because no one really knows exactly what's going on. And sometimes it's if you put a 9-digit number up in front of the parent, the child can recite it accurately, from behind a partition. Or if you put a long word up, if you put a fake word up, a word in different language, they will know what it is. Many of the vetting tests that I was receiving before I even like chose who to follow were parents showing that they could take a book off of their shelf, opened up to any page in the book, point to a word, and their child across the room could start typing what that word was, or they could just point to the number on the page. And so, how is that possible? It's just remarkable. But often the parent will say, "I have to be looking at what they're seeing." So the questions I get from parents are they looking through my eyes? Are they just knowing what's in my mind? Are our consciousness merged and we're seeing and understanding the same inputs? And this is why everyone involved wants more research done, because it is a confounding question. What is happening?
So is this strictly parent-child, or is there other relatives, or are there other people that can do it with you or me, depending on how it works? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, I mean, from what I have found, the first of cases that I was hearing about were parent-child, but then of course there were some adoptive parents. It's not always the mother, sometimes it's the father. And then as I started getting more and more into it, that's when I was really marveling to find out that there was so many teachers and speech pathologists and paraprofessionals in the schools that were saying, absolutely, this is true in my classroom. In fact, I have students who prefer me to ask the questions in our lessons in my mind instead of out loud. It's easier for them. So they'll ask a question in their mind and their student will start answering it. And, one of the videos, I get these wonderful emails from parents, and one that I delighted in was a young boy, 6, just starting school. And his mom said, "This is so interesting because the teacher started telling me that my child would point to the correct answer. It'd be like flashcards or something, like, which is the bike, trying to figure out what this boy knew. And he'd start pointing to the right answer before the teacher even asked the question out loud. And that's when the mom got a hold of me and she said, "What is going on here?" So, I think teachers are experiencing it more often than the parents, and sometimes before the parents are experiencing it.
Interesting. What do you think that cause is? I mean, I understand it being the parent, especially a blood parent on top of that,
Mhm.
but that the teachers are at least in your research,
Mhm.
has shown that the teachers are the ones that are getting. Is it because they're spending more time with them at school? Is that what it is?
Well, I think there's a few things going on. I think one is that anyone who's a parent knows that you are so much more like invested in your child for better or for worse in a way that can be overwhelming to that child, right? If you're watching a basketball game, you're not like really intensely wondering what like Jimmy's doing. You're watching your kid, right? And did their layup look good? And are they keeping up? And is their head in the game? And so
Yeah.
I think with parents, we like put pressure on our children and we have
Mhm.
expectations, and that's nothing to do with us. It's just part and parcel of being a parent. But I think with teachers, that often isn't there at the same degree. And they're able to just like really empty out their mind, empty out their body, empty out their expectations, and be present.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that is one of the things required in spelling to communicate, which is the way that many of these non-speakers talk. And it's an important note to make here. I think it's not that they're not smart and not competent. Often their mind just can't tell their body what to do. And speech is a fine motor skill, which is often very hard to do if you don't have control over, your body and
Mhm.
motor planning. But pointing to letters is a gross motor skill and much easier to do. Um, so, so it's not that. So when you're learning to spell to communicate, you have to clear your mind. You have to be this empty vessel. And I think parents are. You're thinking about dinner. You're thinking about this. Are we? Why are they getting it? And blah, 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 blah. What does this mean? What does it mean
Mhm.
about the? What's? I mean, all that stuff is attached, not for the teachers. And the other thing that I think everyone I've talked to will say that a baseline of these gifts of them, really revealing themselves in many ways is love and openness and acceptance and also belief. And, the amount of emails I've been receiving from parents saying now that I believe this and I listen to the telepathy tapes, my child is finally showing me that they too can do this. Um, and I'm receiving those type of messages from teachers as well. So,
That's
yeah, I
that's
think I
pretty.
think
That's
love is a baseline, kindness and emptying out your expectations is huge.
So you mentioned a couple of spiritual figures in the people that you've talked to about this. We focus a lot on the spirituality, consciousness, evolving and all that kind of stuff that we talk about on the show. As you were talking and explaining the process of what they're doing, again, because of my unique perspective of speaking to 500 plus people at this point about spirituality, what came to my mind was the near-death experiencers and their stories of explaining what they see when they die and come back. One of the things that is spoken about, not only by near death experiencers, but also by gurus and swamis and mystics from the East specifically, they're talking about how how thought is processed on the other side, and it's instant. Like I want to go to Paris, and you're in Paris, kind of thing. But there has been a lot of reports saying that people or souls, I guess, on the other side when they're dead can see through other people's eyes and can kind of experience things through other people's eye. It happens in the life review where you are actually literally in somebody else's body experiencing all the feelings of that person. It seems like they're tapping into something like that. What is your take on the spirituality or the spiritual basis for some of this stuff. Because as you were just mentioning, love is a very big indicator of these abilities, which obviously is the highest vibration or frequency that we have on this in this existence.
Yeah. So when I first started this, I thought I was looking at like what the scientific baseline what might be for telepathy. And it kind of makes sense, right? If you have, we know that if other senses are depressed, other ones heighten and amplify. And, we know that a lot of these skills are kind of used in the animal kingdom, even if it's a sixth sense, meaning like I think of ESP as a seventh sense, right? Because there's other sixth senses we don't have, like echolocation, right? Or
Right,
different
right.
different ways of sensing your environment. So I was thinking, well, this probably makes there's a biological explanation for this, and what I was being, kind of schooled on for quite quickly by non-speaking individuals and often their parents as well, was that no, to these individuals, they'll say it's a spiritual gift, that this is a spiritual gift, that this is the baseline of communication, this is the most natural form of communication. And it makes sense, right? If you believe that our bodies are ephemeral and we are
Mhm,
consciousness before and after, how would you talk without a body? Of course, it's through telepathy. I mean, it would be the only soul communication there is. That's what prayer is.
mhm,
Um, or when we talk to one of our loved ones, I saw a recent study that showed how many people who don't even necessarily believe in the afterlife, but they do talk to their loved ones who passed, which
mhm,
is a complete contradiction, right? But that would be a form of telepathy. So, and then once that was kind of established, then, and there's no reason not to believe the non-speaking individuals, and I say that all the time, like they don't have the same ego and separation that we do, right? Because at least this point, at least up to now in society, they don't have a means of making a living or of like building a brand or, buying a house or having some wonderful career and some marriage and all, this identity that we all put so much stock in. We put everything in. I mean, their greatest concerns are love and unity. And I think truthfulness, and it takes so hard to get a single sentence out when you're when all that motor planning is required to spell that they're not going to just spell out a mass conspiracy of deceit. So when they're talking first about telepathy and then saying it's a spiritual gift, and then so many of them are also talking about leaving their bodies or I don't know if it's leaving their bodies, but going somewhere at night. Often they talk about going to school or going to heaven or talking
Interesting.
to a source or a creator. So many of them have said they see angels. So
Right.
I was nervous to even put that in there. This was so out of like left field for me as a journalist and documentarian, and it felt really tricky for me
Sure.
to stomach. But that's, I think, part of it, right? Is like these are human beings who have not had a voice. And then what on earth would that be like to censor them because it felt uncomfortable for me? I can't do that. Like their
Sure.
words, their experience had to be shared exactly as it is. And so toward the end of the telepathy tapes, many of their spiritual revelations are brought forth.
It's interesting as you say that because that is something very common in deep mysticism and spirituality, especially coming from the East, where at night when you sleep, that you leave either an out of body experience of something like that. We can argue that anytime you're asleep and you're dreaming, you're literally out of body dreaming. You're not in the body specifically because you're not conscious essentially.
Mm.
But stories I've heard are of people sleeping or meditating, but specifically sleeping, can go off, go to a school, speak to ancestors, go to speak to source, angels. I mean, this is kind of wonky stuff. I get it. I completely understand. When I first started hearing these things, I was just like, all right, I'm pretty open-minded, but but then as you start hearing it again and again from multiple different sources, that have
Mhm.
nothing to do with each other, then it starts to really reaffirm that. I assume that's what's happened to you as well, because this is not just like kids in Ohio or kids in California. It's around the world,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And when I first started meeting these families, they didn't know each other. I mean, often the emails that Dr. Powell was getting and then that I started getting when I started getting involved in this was that so often people reach out saying, I don't know if there's anyone else out there like this. This is what's happening to me, or they think it's a singular miracle happening under their roof or in their classroom. And now I don't think that'll happen anymore because this is so out there. But you have to remember before the telepathy tapes came out, this was really deeply secretive, even to the point where if parents, which happen quite often, would bring it up in like a spelling conference where groups can get together to teach their non-speaking children to learn to spell or whatever. It often within those communities, people would say, I think telepathy is happening. Can we talk about that? Or there seems to be something, and it would be kind of shushed and quieted. Like, let's not talk about that here. We're not going to talk about it. So
Right.
it really
Amazing.
was siloed information, but it's around the world, um, all around the world.
Different
And in episode
languages,
8, we go to
everything.
England.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for what I know, like in the telepathy tapes, there's someone from England, there's someone from Mexico, there's someone from Israel. I know just from meeting families, there's also people in India and Pakistan, in Denmark. So it's clearly around the world. Again, I think the big marker here is non-speakers with apraxia. And yeah, telepathy seems to be rampant in that group.
So let's talk about Dr. Powell. She is, or she was when she started this, a very well-respected doctor. But going down this road, when I heard it, I'm like, uh-oh, I can only imagine what happened by the establishment when she started digging into this and asking these questions. Can you talk a little bit about what she went through and what she's still going through by bringing this out into the public?
Yeah, and I think this has been the thing that has plagued researchers and scientists for decades, right? Is this
Hmm.
like there's no longer freedom of inquiry. And
Right.
that should not be the case, and I've heard it referred to as scientism, this idea that like almost science becomes a religion, that science can explain absolutely everything. If you can't explain by science, it's not true. And it's almost become this dogmatic, closed-minded viewpoint where to be skeptical, you have to be open-minded, right? And that's just not the case. So when a researcher who's studying something like ESP, and Dr. Powell wrote a book on it, and not long after that book was released, the she got fined by the medical board at Oregon and then by the board in California. It was expensive. She had to go through psychological testing. And the thing is, no one ever read the book. And then when they finally did read the book, she got her license back pretty quickly. And so there's just this idea that there is fear and intimidation to try to continue to uphold our materialist paradigm. And for folks who are wondering what that means, the materialist paradigm really is, kind of been the reigning paradigm in science and our Western world for the past, few hundred years, where we believe that the only things that are real can be, kind of measured, and felt and touched. And so when we think of materialism, kind of the base of it, right, is like, we have physics and biology and psychology and all these, studies of the world. And with consciousness is at the tippy tip of the pyramid, and we've never been able to explain where it comes from, why it's there, what its function is. And the case we make in at least in episode 6 of the telepathy tapes, and I think by the end, the case is made, I hope, pretty well, is that consciousness shouldn't be considered the tippy top, this unexplained part of the pyramid of our reality. It should be the very base of it. The foundation of our reality is consciousness and not the other way around, which means then we don't have to throw out our textbooks, right? Physics and biology and psychology and a lot of that stuff is still remains. That's all good. That's true. But it's just that consciousness is not at the mistake that happened at that very end. It was at the beginning. And if you look around our world, um, I think there's a lot of evidence of that. Like everything in your office was a thought first. Everything in my house, right, that I'm sitting in was a thought first. Everything I use was a thought first. Our entire world started as a thought before it became a thing. Um, so the idea of consciousness is fundamental, explains a lot. But when consciousness is fundamental, it also explains the things that couldn't be explained in our materialist paradigm, such as ESP and remote viewing and clairvoyance, near-death experiences. This idea that there's somewhere more real than here, and that more real place is kind of this like through line of consciousness.
it's pretty fascinating. I mean, I've gone through so many doctors and PhDs and professionals who've bucked the system, and they have definitely paid for it. But they're the but without let's say the first doctor who said, meditation is there's something here, guys. We should probably study this. That guy was ran out of town, but now it is the most, I think it was one of the most studied things ever. And now there's
Hmm.
so much data that meditation obviously has health benefits and this and that and blah, blah, blah. Hopefully we'll get to that place with this. I think this is interesting because I mean telepathy is always been kind of in the realm of science fiction for the
Hmm.
most part. It's been in the realm of science fiction, but we're now, I mean, with the work that you're doing, we're really kind of like, guys, it's right there. Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
it's a wide shot. This is not AI. There's no cheating here. There's no one, whispering in their ear. I mean, you're a journalist and a well-respected one and has had a hell of a career. It's taken a lot of, as they say, cojones for you to do what you're doing and putting your name and reputation out there. So I do applaud you for that very much.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the science. I think I think there's going to be so much research coming out on this soon, and I
Mhm.
can't wait. I mean, I don't think Dr. Powell can wait. The families can't wait. It's phenomenal. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I loved it meeting Manisha, who's in episode 2. She's a
Mhm.
mom of a non-speaking boy named Akil, and at one point she says, "Akil is the data. Everyone's looking for data. Like Akil is the data. Come research Akil. Here he is." And that's exactly right. The data points are here. And for me, what was fascinating is it wasn't grasping at straws. It wasn't, the day we spent 2 days with Akil, for instance, and he can spell on an iPad or a speaking device across the room from his mother. He doesn't need to be near her. He doesn't need to be touched, or all these things that have plague spelling to communicate, which I think for the most part um, aren't true anymore with this independent spelling happening. But anyway, we did a lot of tests with him, and time after time after time. It's like everything. It was a random number generator and an image generator and a picture generator, a forward number. I would write a word, and then a crew member would cross it out and write a new word. And then Akil across the room would start writing the word I wrote, and then the second got crossed out and a new word was written, he'd start spelling that word. I had crew write words on note cards, and then random crew pick the cards and show it to Manisha, his mother, and all of a sudden Akil's off the races writing that word. So to me, it was like 100% accurate. It was just time after time after time after time. So it wasn't like, oh, this is tricky. Maybe we'll do 10 and he'll get 5 right. It was nothing like that. They were all right. And that is like, I think I was shaking by the end of it. And in episode 2, my DP, which means cinematographer, director of
Mhm.
photography, I love him dearly, and he was a great person to have on this because he's very skeptical and like at least at that point I think he would say he was atheist or agnostic and just didn't believe in anything. I don't think he believed in ghosts. And watching Akil, like by the end of that first day, I went out into the battery room where he was charging batteries and getting a lens or whatever, and he had his head in his hands and was pretty shaken up. And he's like, "What does this mean? Do I have to believe in God? Does this mean we have soul?" Because quite instantly it goes there when you're like, "Wait, if this is real, what else have I dismissed that could be real?" Um,
That's a really, really interesting point because I think that why you get so much pushback on these kind of ideas is that, well, if this is true, then it doesn't just knock this brick out of of the building. It starts to shake the foundation of what we
yeah,
believe. So that your DP is a great example of that. He's like, well, if this is real, then do I
hmm,
have a soul? Is there really a
right,
God? Like, is
yeah,
there like, is this a hologram? Are we walking around in the Matrix? Like, there's so many other questions that start to come up
yeah,
based on that. And I think
totally.
that, do you believe that
Yeah.
that's why people are so afraid of delving into things that might challenge the status quo, which, by the way, has been the only way we've been able to move forward
Right.
as a species is by challenging what came before us and building upon that. But do you
Yeah.
believe that that's why there's so much reservation with it?
Yeah, and that's always been the case, right? I mean, even like when we decided the Earth wasn't flat anymore, or that, the Earth wasn't the center
Well,
of our
most of
sun.
us, most
Yeah.
most of us have
Right,
not,
right,
but
right, right.
most
Yeah.
of us believe that the Earth
Right.
is not flat. Yes.
Yeah. But, even that, like, women running a marathon, their ovaries could fall out. I mean, like we've had so many weird thoughts, like even 50 years ago, that
Right.
are, I don't know why people didn't want women playing sports and running marathons or wearing jeans, but that wasn't that long ago that
Yeah.
we were really scared of stuff like that. So I think we are always scared of things that are new. But what is fascinating to me is none of this is new. I mean,
Oh
this
no.
idea of being connected and connected through your mind or heart or whatever it is, or whether it's like we're entangled in some way, right? Has always been there. And we've forgotten that, I think, in our Western materialist societies. But I think if you were to go speak with, Vikings 1,000 years ago, or Native Americans, or, Aborigines, telepathy would be part and parcel of survival, of knowing where the hunt is, of knowing when or if someone's coming home. And the thing is, like, we all have brushes with that, right? Like, I'm sure any listener out there could say, something simple like, I was thinking of someone I hadn't thought about in 5 years, and then they texted me. That happens to all of us, I would say. And then there's people who will say it was so weird, like right before my grandma died, like she appeared to me in a dream and said goodbye, or I had
Hmm.
this horrible feeling. And I got then I like 10 minutes later, I got a phone call that this person was in an accident. I mean, that is throughout all of us, and then we just chalk it up as weird and go on about our day. Um, but I think that if we made a big effort to really kind of bring those connections back, we could be much more deeply connected.
Yeah, with my wife as well. Like I'll be thinking something and she'll say it out loud. I'm like, it's a joke. I'm like, get out of my head. And we do it vice versa because we have that kind of thing that we do. I don't have it with my kids, but with her, I mean, we just spend so much time together that it's just that that ability to be able to do it. And it's weird. And we both understand it's weird. I'm not saying we do
Mhm.
it all the time, but there's moments of it that's really interesting. I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, what are the ages? What's
Mhm.
the oldest person that you've been able to kind of verify in your research, or that Dr. Powell was able to verify in their research? Because kids are very different than adults when it comes to being able to have these abilities because of their openness, because of their clearing of the mind, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I have 50, 60. I mean, a lot of the individuals.
Stop.
Yeah,
Really?
like even in the final episode, I was trying to get non-speakers to share their thoughts. Like I wanted them to close it out and have the floor with, what did we get wrong? What was right? What do they want people to know now that this information's out there? And there was a woman working, a nurse that was helping me gather information from one of the non-speaking individuals in this like shared living, kind of like nursing home in England. And that
Mhm.
woman was in her 50s. Many of the individuals in the telepathy tapes are in their 20s now. Certainly in their teens, and certainly the younger kids. It's just the younger individuals, they're not as like established in spelling yet. So it's especially for the telepathy tapes, especially as we go into the film and like Diane's like university back test, we need to have individuals who are fully independently spelling. And it takes time to build those new mental pathways that help your body do that. So many of the people that I was working with were in their late teens, 20s, 30s.
What are like a couple of the most um impressive or shocking things that you've seen so far in your travels doing the telepathy tapes and prepping for your doc and all of that stuff? Like, what were some that you just like you started to shake, or like completely were just like, what is happening?
This was one of the things that was really weird. Like once you saw the telepathy, it became run of the mill really quickly. Like I think the first 5 times it was like, oh my gosh. And then like it would happen, happen, happen. And then it's like, okay, let's try random picture generator. So the random numbers, and then it would happen. And then random image generator. So we kind of marveled at how quickly that became commonplace. And it would happen every time. Like every time you were with a new individual, a new non-speaker that you were testing, it was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And then like it was like, oh, okay, well, okay, what next? Because it was so consistent that it wasn't remarkable, even though it's so remarkable. Um, so I think some of the other things that became like gut punchingly wild were things often happening that weren't a telepathy test. So, for instance, when we were in Atlanta, we had a production assistant that witnessed one of our non-speakers from that day,
Hmm.
Houston, talking about people's angels and how he can see angels. And this production assistant, I think, wanted to test this out, and he's like, "Do I have an angel?" And Houston said, "Yeah." And the production assistant said, "Well, what's her name?" And he told me later, this production assistant, that he knew his sister, had like lost a child, I think, through a really late in pregnancy. And, there was his a niece died, at like 1 or 2. So he's thinking, okay, it's one of these people. And then, he thought, well, this will be the big test, right? Is this one of these? Because Houston said you have an angel and it's a baby and it's a little girl. So sorry if I left that part out. So Houston said you do
Okay.
have an angel. She's a little girl and very, very, very young, like almost a baby. And so that's when this production assistant was thinking, okay, who's in my life that's a baby? And da da da. Okay, I'm going to ask for the name because there are some young little girls who have died. And so he said, well, what's the name? And Houston said, I can't tell you because you refused to name her. And Sam like got really upset. And that was the production assistant. And I asked him, what's going on, man? What happened? And he said, my wife and I had a really early, like, she had to have like a medical emergency type abortion in her first
Mm.
trimester years ago. And she wants to name this baby. And she says, it was a person. And he's like, it was too hard for me to even think that way. So I was just like, no, it was just cells. We didn't have a child yet. And nope, nope, no, no, nope. Like, we're not going to name her. We're not going to do a burial. Like, let's just move on. Like, I think that was Sam's way of kind of coping. It's not real. It isn't. And his wife was like, no, like, we have to name her. And Sam refused to name her. So when Houston said to him, yeah, there's a baby girl and you refuse to name her. I mean, anyone that was in that room, and there was like a lot of us, it's pretty emotional. It's pretty unexplainable. And it certainly meant something to him, deeply meant something to
Mm.
him. And then, of course, the question is, wait, did Houston telepathically like grab that out of his consciousness? Or was there really an angel there? But again, I think like one of the things I found is this is a population that's not deceiving. They're not, there's nothing to be gained by
Yeah,
lying about
right.
that.
Yeah, they're not selling books or doing
No.
speaking tours.
Oh,
That's so
exactly.
much.
Yeah, exactly.
S-
Yeah.
So when you just presented there, because we've been discussing the telepathy aspect of it, people looking kind of like, are you in my mind? Are you looking through my eyes? That's one thing. But what the Houston was doing sounded much more as a psychic phenomenon, where either clairvoyant, clairsentient, they could see something there, um, or just being able to connect psychically with like the other side, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, is that something you found a lot of as well in this population?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is stuff that, yes, I mean, that was the thing that I, again, was not prepared for. I felt totally nervous and sheepish putting in the telepathy tapes was how often many of the non-speaking individuals that I was meeting or parents or teachers that work with them quite often were saying that they see people on the other side, that they see, quote unquote, non-human intelligence, right? Like whether that's an angel or something more sinister or a spirit or a loved one. I mean, that comes up all the time, almost like as much as the telepathy. And again, like a lot of the stuff that was really jarring to me were things that I did not know how to manage or handle or that were coming from parents when we weren't shooting. Like one parent was sending me pictures of her daughter, terrified, looking at something in a corner, and she was saying that I see a spirit, and he's a bad, bad, bad spirit, and he won't leave. And the parents like went to the mall, and they said that no matter where they're going, this girl is saying that this bad, bad spirit is like following them. And they were like, "How do we get rid of it?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I have no idea. That's like not anything I know about." And um, and so I think that's stuff where and then it wasn't just one email, right? These are emails coming in all the time about stuff like that. So the reality that these individuals are often experiencing a much richer visual, emotional, different reality than we are, that there seems to be able to see, I don't know if what you want to call it, like consciousness that we can't see, beings that we can't see, a realm we can't
Around,
see. But,
yeah.
yeah.
Let me ask you, how has this reshaped your understanding of consciousness and our relationship with the brain and all of this? Because I gotta believe this has shaken you to the core.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't certain that we survived death. And the fact, the whole reason I kind of started on this journey that ended up into the telepathy tapes was trying to figure out what happened to two friends of mine who died in like the prime of their life with kids, really good people too, where it was like, this isn't
Hmm.
fair. The heck, there can't be any meaning in this chaos around me,
Right.
um, and now I believe fully that consciousness survives the body, that there is somewhere more real than here. We are experiencing this 3D life in these bodies that we have, but this is not reality. This is a version of a ephemeral reality. And we're learning a lot here at Earth School, but this is not the final destination. I believe that telepathy is the baseline of communication. And if we truly want to evolve as a consciousness, as a being, as a group, we do need to usher
Species.
in
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah, as a species, thank you. Because um, if you are not afraid of if you're not afraid of someone hearing your thoughts, it's because they're pure and you're thinking about the other and you're thinking about the group. You're thinking about wholeness and loving thoughts, right? And so the only way to get to that point is really if we were all sharing our thoughts. I think the idea of someone being in your mind terrifies most of us because some of our thoughts are egotistical and sinister and thinking about the self instead of the other. Um, so I have completely upended my worldview. Um, but it's beautiful. This is a much more rich and meaningful world to live in, and it does impact your choices when you feel certain that this is not all there is.
Do you and I don't know if you're an expert in this. I'm definitely not, but I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to think of in the animal kingdom or in
Hmm.
nature where telepathy plays a part. And the
Hmm.
only thing I can think of is birds flying in patterns, the bees flying or insects flying in kind of these patterns that they just kind of follow each other no matter where
Yeah.
they go. Is that kind of, I mean, have you played around with any of that in your research?
Yeah. In fact, there in episode 5 of the telepathy tapes, there is a beautiful story. And it was something that I think my dad, just I have to go back really quick, is very again materialistic.
Hmm.
Not in the I want money, but believing in
Right.
materialism as the basis of our society and reality. Um and so nothing really, I think me doing this, he was like, what is happening with you here? Not anymore now. He's full-fledged, like he believes everything because he's been on this journey with me. But
That's awesome.
the first thing that really moved him was the story of this man, Lawrence, I believe his name was, and he's in episode 5 of the telepathy tapes, which is our animal telepathy episode. And this man Lawrence we was in Africa with his wife and tried to get all these elephants that were being poached to a preserve. It took a lot of time. These elephants were a nuisance, right? They were, in villages and stuff, causing a ruckus. So it took a lot of time and trust and love. But he got all these elephants to this preserve, and he kind of had a lifelong friendship with these elephants, and as much as a human can, but certainly saved a lot of their lives. And he kind of this reserve was huge. He was living on a house far, far away from where the elephants kind of had migrated. And he died. And pretty much like the day he died, a bunch of these elephants started walking to his house. And then they made a circle around his house and they did the whole grieving ceremony and they stayed at his house. And they could not figure out how or why they knew he died, but they certainly knew. And they did an appropriate time of mourning at the house and then they left. But the story doesn't end there because every year on his death, at least for I think 5 years, they would come back to his house on the day that he died and honor him. And how do you make sense of that?
I mean, what do you have to say? Like what you could be the most skeptical person on the planet, but there's something happening. What
Yeah.
that is if you're open-minded is very exciting. If you're closed-minded is terrifying.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
that is a telepathy, a connection,
Yeah.
something. I mean, we've all heard those stories.
Yeah.
If you're a parent, you have a connection with your children. You
Right.
know when they're in trouble. Like I remember when I was a kid and I was outside and playing and a dog, attacked me and I jumped on top of a car to get away from him. And my
Yeah.
grandmother, not knowing anything, I didn't scream or anything. She just came running out. Like,
Hmm.
how did she know? Like from
Yeah.
inside of a building or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
how did she know? Like those
Yeah.
connections are there. We've all
Yeah.
felt it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too in episode 5 of the Telepathy Tapes, I introduce a wonderful biologist, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who's been around for a long time. And one of, I think a study that he did that everyone can kind of love because it hits so many of our lives is he did a study called Dogs Know When their owners are coming home. And what he did is he would
Yeah.
you put, have cameras all over house to see if dogs or pets knew when their owners were coming home. And they would page an owner. So, this is years ago when pagers were a thing at their office and say, okay, come home now. So it was a different time every day. They would have them come home in a taxi cab. They would have them come home in a different car. They'd have them come home from different directions, all sorts of things. So the dog wouldn't know the sound of the car, the this or the that, or the time. But the second the person was paged and started leaving the office, the dog and sometimes I think in 30% of the cases, the cat would go wait by the door and get excited. And what was really interesting is sometimes those owners would be pulled into a meeting, right? Or had a flat tire, something happened. And as soon as that happened, then the animal would go back to their bed or go upstairs and rest because they knew something had disrupted their owner coming home. And then when the owner was coming home again, the animal would come back. So we know that this is the case, not in all pets, but in many of the ones tested, this was the case. So I think animals have relied on telepathy to communicate. And I think the baseline of it again is like a deep connection and love. I don't think there's like a sinister element to this. I think it's always usually between people who are deeply connected and have a very safe, loving relationship.
Yeah, I always wondered, how do animals know when there's an earthquake coming or when there's a
Mhm.
hurricane coming? Because they don't have the Weather Channel. And they
Mhm.
start doing things and preparing for things. But you wonder, how do they know? Like like that elephant story, like how could they know?
Yeah. And I mean, some of that could be them, they're more tied into wind patterns, or
Nature.
they can hear a change in this, or they can hear that this bird is, I mean, who knows what because we know that there's all sorts of colors we can't see and audible frequencies we can't pick up on that some animals can. So I do think a lot of that might be able to be just explained by science, but some of it can't be. And the
Like the
stuff that,
elephant story. Yeah, like that
yeah,
elephant story.
but some of it can't be explained. And I think that's the loopholes that we need to be really thoughtful about. The stuff that can't be explained, we need to look at, we need to study. And I think we'll find that we are much more complex and powerful and connected than we could have ever imagined.
So you've been doing this for a while now. How many years have you been working on this project?
About 4 now.
About 4 years. Okay. So you've seen, you are similar to me because I have a unique perspective because I have all these guests and I get to talk to all these people. Well, you have a unique perspective because you've been able to do the same with people in this field. What the hell do you think is going on? What is your hypothesis from being as close as you are to it?
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you that like a lot of the researchers that I've talked to,
Mhm.
like Dr. Powell, this was her work, right? Her research. When I've asked her what she thinks is going on, she will say that she thinks it is, yeah, kind of the equivalent of a simulation. But I don't want people to get worried about that word. I don't think it means we're living in a video game and that we're being controlled and anything like that. I think the base of it is that there's something more real than here, right? This like baseline reality that isn't this, and that we might have, souls that exist happily in that other reality, but come here into these bodies and then go back again to that place. So I almost, when realizing, looking at the science of this, talking to the non-speaking individuals, that was when I was like, okay, everyone's talking about some spiritual baseline that isn't here, and this connection and being able to see things that we don't see. And I could see why the simulation theory, it almost is a catch-all for religion too, if you think about it, right? This idea that
Mhm.
there's something more real, that we have souls, that there's something that created us, right?
Mhm.
I mean, they are the same. They're talking kind of about the same thing,
Mhm.
um, just in different ways. And I think I do believe that there's a base reality that's not here. And I believe now in other dimensions that we can't see because so many non-speakers talk about that all the time. They talk about seeing spirits, they talk about seeing angels, they talk about communicating with God, they talk about being taught by great teachers in another place. They talk
Hmm.
about being able to absorb information in this other place, and some of them will go at night and then come back knowing all the storylines to certain books or authors, great literature from around the world. And one non-speaker who's actually interesting because he was fully a speaker who with has high functioning autism, and then he chose not to speak because he thought his words were clunky and difficult and brought him too down to this lower vibration, and he preferred to just stop talking at a certain age. But he will say that he can go to what he calls the realms and get information on any topic at all, anything that we want. And he says that everything that we do here on Earth in this 3D world adds information to this place. And any decision we make, anything we create, anything goes there. So,
Mm.
so all this information library keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's interesting because, again, if you talk to people who talk about simulation theory, part of that is about like amassing information. So I feel like there's a link between spirituality, simulation theory, dimensions, and those are things that have come up all the time in this work. Um, and whether you want to be super sciencey about it and just be like, you know, we're it's a simulation theory, we're created by something else, this isn't
Hmm.
really real, or if it's like uh, a deep reverence for a God who lovingly created us. I think people are going to fall in different ways. I tend to believe because of how much love comes throughout all of this, and everything the non-speakers want to talk about is love is what unifies, love is what's important, unity is what's important. We're all one. We're all one. Um, that spiritual message is what I cling to. I think that's the most important thing here, and I think it's what religions and faith groups have been talking about from the beginning of time.
Hmm.
And so that lends me to believe that that is the deepest truth.
And when you were saying that he goes to another place where all information is, and as you were explaining everything, you were just saying like everything we do keeps building into this library. You're basically explaining the Akashic records.
Mhm.
Um, and some quantum physicists have talked about it as the Akashic field, the thing that kind of joins all of us. I mean, it's fascinating how science and spirituality are becoming closer and closer and closer and closer to the point where I believe we will look back at the materialistic times, materialism era and just laugh, kind of like what we do now with people's, like, oh, Thor, like not Thor, Zeus is your god. Oh god, yeah,
Yeah,
the sun
right.
god is Ra. Like, and you look around, you're like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Mhm.
It's pretty fascinating. What is your goal with all of this, Kai? Like, what do you want to achieve by putting this out in the world? What's your hopes and dreams for the telepathy tapes?
Well, first and foremost, of course, is for everyone to treat non-speakers and as though they're competent, to know that they are competent, that they are in there, they're individuals, they're smart, funny, they have interests and hopes and desires, just like all of us, and that they need to be enabled to spell, and that needs to be accessible and affordable. And it's really damaging to continually say that their words are not their own, especially when parents and teachers, the ones working with them every day, are like, there's no doubt these are their words. They're self-diagnosing themselves. They know things I don't know. So, really vindicating and creating and carving out a space for the non-speaking individuals to thrive and be met in our society and our schools is the most important thing. And like in second measure is creating a paradigm shift. I think that we have it a little wrong with materialism. Not all wrong. A lot of
Hmm.
science is correct, but that consciousness is not the big mystery that just happened to come from everything. It is the base. And the only way we can describe any of these gifts, like telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, remote viewing, near death experiences, all the things that seem to overlap in what people are saying, is if consciousness is fundamental, there's something more real than here, and that we need to really know and care about that so we can be loving each other, forgiving each other, thinking about the other, not just humanity, but animals. We are one. We're all just in this little blue ball. We have to take care of one another. And and I and if we can start, you know, getting to that place, I think we have a shot to continue as a human race.
Yes, there is a couple challenges along the way for sure, but I agree with you. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all my guests, Guy. What is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Well, I think if you're living a fulfilled life, you have a deep sense of what your destiny is and you're not afraid to die. Um, I think if you are being true to yourself and you like the choices that you're making every day, you're following your heart and doing what you want to do, you don't fear death because you are doing it right. You're doing what you should be doing while you're here. And so for me, that's always been number one is just making sure that my choices resonate with who I am deeply, and why I think it is I'm supposed to be here, right? I mean, I know a lot of people believe that you have these like you choose kind of your destiny points before you get here. You are here to hit those points, and things feel really off if you're not hitting those points, but you feel really great when you are hitting those destiny points. Um, so yeah, I think that staying true to yourself is such a trite thing to say, but I think if you listen, are you happy? Are you doing what you're meant to be doing? If you're doing those things, you're going to feel great. Um, Not be afraid to pass over. I can't imagine being afraid of death. Yeah. Okay. So next question.
That's another question. I normally don't ask it, but are you afraid of death anymore?
No. Mm-mm. No. I mean, I want
Were
to see
you
my
before?
kids.
Were you before? Were you before?
I mean, not really afraid, again, because I think I always felt like I was hitting my destiny points. And when I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, I would feel really sick and really anxious and really angry. Like I
Mhm.
knew I was supposed to move to California and I couldn't explain it. And like my whole family was so settled in Chicago. And I was like, no, there's some
Hmm.
reason I have to move. And it was, I was I got in the hospital because I was so sick with like knowing I was in the wrong place. And then I moved out here and that never happened again. So I think, no, I wasn't afraid of dying before because I felt like I was doing what I wanted to do and loving to do with my life. But like what I was afraid of was like not seeing my kids grow up if I died too soon, not knowing who they
Mhm.
married. Um, and now I don't fear that because I think that if something happened to me, I'll be very aware of what they're doing.
If you had a chance to go back in time and speak to little Kai, what advice would you give her?
I didn't know you were going to ask that. I was prepared for that one. I've always been my own little engine in a way. So I've had a lot of faith in myself, but I think I work too hard and I've taken things really seriously. So I guess at times I wish I would have just like kicked back and relaxed and lived in the present moment because at the end, that's really all we have, right? Is like now. And and so yeah, I mean, I think especially through my teenage years and 20s, really then I wish I would have just like relaxed a bit more and just enjoyed and been connected in the exact moment that I was living. Um, but I do look back on all the mistakes and non-mistakes I've made, and they're all great. Like those are the things that make you who you are.
How do you define God or source?
Well, I had experiences really little that were interesting. I think the
Hmm.
first was I got locked into a bathroom that I wasn't supposed to be in during a swim meet.
Hmm.
Um, I couldn't like the other one had the mop, so I knew there was like the secret bathroom at the public pool that like you go down this long stairwell and usually there's someone sitting at the top of it during meets, and I had to go so bad, so I just went down there. He had been away from his chair, the metal door slammed, and I'm like, oh no, I'm stuck down here. And I could hear my heat being announced, and I started screaming. And I thought, I think I must have been 7. I was like, I'm gonna die down here. I'm freezing. I'm in a bathing suit. There's no food. There's no water. No one's gonna find me because this guy was upstairs making sure no one came down here. And I couldn't open the door. And then I started screaming for help. And then I started praying. And then I heard this like really loving voice being like, you're fine. We're gonna get you out. Hold on. And then like the door opened and I like ran really quick, like out the door, like, where's the woman? Where's the woman? Where's the woman? And like ran up the stairs and the guy, what are you doing down here? You weren't supposed to be down this bathroom. I'm like, no, 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 where was the woman who just let me out? And he's like, there's been no woman down here. And I think that was my first sense of like, I was an angel. I knew for sure it was. What else
Wow.
could it have been? Um, and then when I was my crush, I told my daughter the story last night when I was like 12 or 13, my crush at the time, Matthew Corrigan, who was the first boy who ever asked me out, he died in a car crash.
Oh.
And I don't think my family knew how devastated I was. And I remember they wanted to go see Robin Hood or something. And I was like, I'm just going to sleep. And I fell asleep on the sofa, or I was trying to fall asleep and I was under a bunch of blankets. And then I heard someone say goodbye so loud in my ear. And I thought, what's my brother's playing a joke? That's so mean. So I got up, like ran around, and then I saw that the car was gone out of the driveway. None of my family was there. So I went back to bed again, got under the couch, blankets on the couch, and then I heard someone say my name and say goodbye again. So that was the next time where I was like, what the heck? Like someone was there. So those things were happening a lot when I was little, you know, um, and they don't happen as much now as you get older.
Mhm.
But to me, at a very young age, I was like, okay, there's something bigger than just us.
What is love?
Love is anything that unifies. And I've learned that from the non-speakers. I used to think it's like you die for this person or you die for this, or it's putting someone else before you. But I think the most simple definition is it's anything that unifies, right? It's
Beautiful.
yeah.
And what is the ultimate purpose of this life?
Well, I think it is to grow out of those human desires that are often ego driven, selfish. Um, and I think to get to the point where we are thinking of unity and love and forgiveness and connection. Um, and I also think we can't underestimate like what we create here, because I do think that's what we have in common with God or the source is it's what creates. And so anything we create, I believe, goes into that Akashic field, that is outlives us by strides, right? Anything we do here, anything you own, that doesn't outlive you. Come on. Only the things that create last. And so for me, it's like creating, and that could be
Mhm.
relationships. It could be building a home. That's going to outlive you. It could be creating a organization that takes care of people. It could be creating a feeling on this earth, whatever it is, but creating is really important.
And where can people find out more about you and support your making of the Telepathy Tapes documentary, which I got to see?
Yeah, so all of this started in hopes of making this visual, right? And like filming university back tests and all those things. So if people go to the telepathytapes.com, they can donate to the film. And there's a
Mhm.
button right there. Um, they can also watch the trailer that we have, and some of the telepathy tests as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And do you have any parting messages for the audience?
No, I would just say to that you, and which I think your audience does, but the most important thing is to be skeptical but open-minded. I think is if you close your mind, you're just as dogmatic and frustrating as, you know, the old line, fundamentalist who did not who believed so hard that the earth was the center of the universe, right? Like being closed-minded is not helpful. So if we keep open-minded and we stay curious and we stay kind, we're going to solve some of these or answer some of these questions.
Guy, thank you again so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I'm a big supporter of what you're doing. I really hope you get this movie made and get this out there because I think it could be a game changer. It already is with your show, and hopefully we can help a little bit along the way. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you, your work, and what you're doing to awaken this planet. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate it. And you as well.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.